In this module, we are going to discuss how to turn a checklist into a memo. Now, checklists are, in accordance with professional standards, entirely acceptable ways to document audit work. Now, obviously, if you're doing an inventory observation and there are many different steps you're going to do, it's probably impractical to have a checklist to do that. But many things in an audit, I considered this, can be documented satisfactorily in a checklist. Now, there are some people who don't like that and say, oh, I think you need to write a memo. So we're going to talk about how you can quickly and simply turn a checklist into a memo. And as always, we want to be efficient and effective, follow professional standards, and document what we have done properly. Now, it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to turn your checklist into a memo. Checklist is entirely satisfactory documentation. If anyone tells you differently, word search through standards and you'll find lots of paragraphs that say that. But if somebody really insists that they want a memo instead of a checklist, it's easy to do. Now, there are some risks with doing that. If you just sit down and start to write a memo based on your recollection of what you've done, the first thing you're probably going to do is duplicate what you've already got documented in a checklist. There's also the possibility that there's incorrect recitation of what you have done. In other words, you don't quite get it exactly correct and you have an inconsistency. You may miss things. There may be things that you did that you forget to document in your memo. You may accidentally add things that weren't otherwise documented and maybe that you didn't do by accident. So it's easy for someone to criticize your memo and compare the documentation in the file to your memo. So it's very important to be consistent. The other thing is, if you're attempting to fool a practice inspector with this, they may recognize that it's boilerplate. Like if you just have a standard memo that you include in every file on journal entries, they may recognize the same memo in every file. You didn't write it for the particular file. And it potentially is a lot of time wasted. If you're going to do this from square one in each file, it's going to take rather a long time to do so. How on earth can we accomplish this? Well, copy and paste. If you have a checklist in Excel, it's relatively simple to copy the checklist steps into Word and produce a memo. And then what you will have done will be entirely consistent with what is in your checklist. So here is a part of the journal entry testing checklist that I use. 4 of, I think, 7 steps. We can see for step number 2, it's necessary to add a working paper where you documented something. So we see that the person who did it, MN, has initialed that he or she did it, and we have a date that they did it, and it goes on for 7 steps. So copy the first set of text from the checklist, and there's really not a lot you need to do to this particular set of text. This is what I did. Now, the only thing you might want to do, and it is required by standards to say who did it and when, and so if it's you that did it, you might go, well, I, manager and manager on day, month, year, did this. If several different people did it, you might want to say, on July the 1st, 2023, manager and manager did this, and on July the 4th, senior and senior did that. So tailor it more specifically. But standards do require that we have date and who did it documented. We've got that in the checklist. Maybe you decide to skip it in your memo. Maybe if if the person who did it was the same person and they did it all on the same day, you could just down at the bottom sign it manager and manager and have a date. Something to think about. And then keep going. I considered this. Now the checklist is phrased as a question. We'll probably want to turn that into a statement. And then the checklist has a piece of advice that maybe certain individuals have access. And if they do, note who makes entries or refer to a working paper where this is documented. And the checklist goes okay, see working paper JE1. So this time we just go, I considered the design, and only certain individuals have access, and these are noted on working paper JE1. And again, you could replace the I with a name and the date. It'll depend on the nature of the memo. Now, the other thing to remember in an audit, particularly in a small audit in a small firm, it may be that the client makes no journal entries or adjustments in the preparation of the financial statements. Or it may be that any journal entries or adjustments are made by the auditor, proposed by the auditor, I should say, and discussed with the client and approved by the client, and that's not uncommon. So perhaps that's all you're going to say. The only adjustments made at year end were made by the auditor in discussion with the client, and accordingly there are none made by the client that we need to look at. Anyway, the checklist I use has 7 steps. Maybe it would take 5 minutes to copy, paste, and edit each of these 7 steps. It's a complete waste of time. But as I say, some practice inspectors like this, so it's easy to give them a document, spend 5 minutes, copy, paste, and edit out of Excel into Word, and put the document in the file, and it will be consistent. Now it's easy. I was struggling to figure out how I might automatically do this, and it will take a couple of minutes. It would be even more fun if I could automate my checklist so that it automatically just produced this memo. But for instance, these are the kinds of things that you might have to do it for other than journal entries, subsequent events. Inventory count, you are going to have something already in the file, and maybe you just do that a little more carefully, so not only does it document what you have done, but it also provides guidance to the staff we're going to do it next year. Related parties, going concerns. So if there are any of these things where somebody wants a memo, pretty simple to turn your checklist into a memo. So thanks for listening.